Former US President Barack Obama has released a statement in response to the Israel war. Even as we support Israel, we should also be clear that how Israel prosecutes this fight against Hamas matters. In particular, it matters, as President Biden has repeatedly emphasised, that Israel's military strategy abides by international law, including those laws that seek to avoid, to every extent possible, the death or suffering of civilian populations. Let's bring in now live Bren Carlill. Bren is from the Zionist Federation of Australia. Bren, what did you make of that contribution from President Obama? Is it expected and in line with the comments made previously by President Biden?
Expected from comments made previously by President Obama. The idea that Israel does abide by the laws of armed conflict, and it always has, and the idea that these well-meaning people suggest that, Israel should be careful to abide by the laws of armed conflict, all it does is cast doubt on the fact that it already does, that's Israeli practice. So it's actually quite unhelpful, especially when you consider what Biden has done, which is basically said to Israel, you've got the full right, as recognized by multiple countries around the world, to destroy Hamas, to remove Hamas from power, and we support you in that right. And of course, and then going on to say, we know that you'll be doing it while abiding by the laws of armed conflict, and we encourage you to do so.
And you've made that point that Israel does do that, but by the same token, we see each day the death toll climb in the Gaza Strip, including among children. How do those two things, how are they both able to exist parallel to one another, abiding by international law and the rules and laws of war, and yet that civilian toll climbing so dramatically?
I'd make a couple of points on that. First of all, war is terrible, and the laws of armed conflict are not designed to prevent all civilians from dying. They're designed to prevent harm as much as possible to civilians. So in other words, if a civilian does die in an armed conflict, that doesn't necessarily mean that one of the laws of armed conflict has been broken. So, for instance, civilians are never, ever, ever allowed to be targeted. However, if a valid military object is targeted and civilians are killed as part of that target, that is a horrible tragedy, but it's not a crime. If all means necessary were taken to make sure that the expected injury or death of civilians was not disproportionate to the expected military advantage accrued from that attack, then it's not a crime. And these are harsh ways of looking at it. It's a horrible calculation, but these are the laws of armed conflict, and they are set down to minimize as much as possible the harm to civilians in war, knowing that horribly civilians will be harmed during warfare. But I do want to make one more point, if you'll let me. In Tuesday last week, an Islamic Jihad rocket hit a Hamas hospital. The media reported that 500 civilians were killed in that attack. Independent reviews have later suggested that it would probably be more like 20 civilians were killed. Now, that is horrible that any civilians were killed in something like this. But that figure of 500, right, was grossly inflated, and it was inflated on purpose by Hamas in order to make Israel look bad. So there's all these figures of 4,000 people, 5,000 people dying in Gaza. Now, there is no doubt that there's horrible deaths in Gaza and civilians are dying. But I would suggest that when media take the Hamas talking points as to the number of people who have died, they should take that with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, and also the catalyst for this catastrophe we're seeing now was the atrocities perpetrated by the terrorists from Hamas. So that's the starting point that we do have to get back to amid the calamity that is unfolding in Gaza right now. Bren, with the release of a couple of hostages, a few more over the last 24 hours, does that provide any encouragement?
Look, not really. Obviously, we welcome the release of any of the hostages, but I don't think we should fool ourselves into thinking that this is a humanitarian gesture by Hamas. We should, if we start going down that path, we should remember the nature of the hostage taking and the events that led to it. We should remember that these two elderly women, for instance, they're not civilians, unfortunately, caught up in the horrors of war. They were targeted by Hamas for capture, and they were captured. And now that they've been released, their husbands are still in Gaza. Look, Hamas has got this drip feed of release. If they release two hostages per day, they'll still be releasing hostages in 3 months' time. This is an event. Hamas knows that when the Israeli ground operation occurs, it is only a matter of time until Hamas rule in Gaza ends. And they are drip feeding the release of these hostages in a cynical attempt to delay for as long as possible and possibly prevent the Israeli ground operation that will remove Hamas from power.
Bren, Carlill from the Zionist Federation, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Now, the ABC's managing director is